Hello, everyone. I am Kim Kluche, Assistant Director of Archaeology and Heritage Management with the Heritage Conservation Branch at the Ministry of Parks, Culture and Sport. Welcome to the second day of our 2024 winter webinars. Before we start, it's important to acknowledge those with whom we share these lands. Regina, where I'm located, is in Treaty 4 territory, which is the traditional land of the Cree and Saulteaux, Nakota, Dakota, and Lakota, and home of the Métis. These webinars are an opportunity to learn about some interesting places around the province and the work that individuals, organizations, and communities have done to preserve them. But not just preserve them, these places we'll hear about are still serving their communities in a variety of important ways. As the title of the webinar series implies, these places are important not only for connecting us with our past, but also for the contributions they can make to our lives today. There are real social, cultural, economic, and even environmental benefits to conserving and continuing to use and engage with these places. We are seeing examples of that throughout these presentations. In today's presentation, we'll hear about the work that the Saskatchewan Indigenous Cultural Centre undertook to bring surviving pieces of the Buffalo Child Stone, a huge boulder with deep spiritual value for First Nations, home to a site near the boulder's original location within Douglas Provincial Park, creating a space for commemoration, education, and First Nations ceremonial gathering. There'll be time for questions at the end of the hour, so I'll ask you to hold your questions until then. You can also put questions in the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can. Our presenter today is Melody Wood, who is currently with the Aboriginal Friendship Centres of Saskatchewan, but was formerly a part of the Saskatchewan Indigenous Cultural Centre team who undertook the Buffalo Child Stone project. Melody is going to tell us how this project succeeded and created a place for people to reconnect with this vital part of their cultural heritage. Melody, I'll turn things over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Danse Kakio, Melody Wood Nedsigasan, Waski Chosik, Ochinia. My name is Melody Wood, and I am from the Little Pine First Nation. That is near North Battleford and just over the hill from Poundmaker Reserve. What I'm going to do first is I will go over a short story of the Buffalo Child Stone, and then we'll go into the story of how it all came to be and the work at the SICC. But in regards to the Buffalo Child Stone, long ago, there was a community and they were traveling, moving from one place to the next, and a baby had not been secured properly in the travois, and it was lost in the prairies. And after a while, a buffalo found the child crying from hunger, and so they fed the little boy. He grew up to be fast, he was strong, and he ran around just like a buffalo did. And humans had caught glimpses of this boy as he was growing up, and they thought that he was the spirit of the buffalo, and they could never catch him. And one day when he was a little bit older, a bunch of the buffalo, they had gone to take a drink at the lake, and for the very first time, he saw himself in the water, and he realized that he did not look like the rest of his buffalo kin. So this made him sad, and he was talking with his father about why he looked different from anyone else. And so the father had shared with him that he was human, that he had been raised by them, and they raised him as buffalo. And of course, his curiosity got a hold of him, and he decided that he was going to leave his buffalo family to go look for his human family. And it took him a long time, but eventually he did find his mother and his father. And it was shared that he was a handsome man, and he eventually found companions and had a family and a household. But when it came to with his human family, he would never chase or hunt or kill or eat buffalo, nor would anyone in his family. And that's the respect that they had for his buffalo family. But over time, he grew to become lonely for his buffalo mother and father, and that feeling started to eat away at him. And while it seemed quite sudden to the community, he eventually made the decision to leave his human family to go look for his buffalo family once again. So he did find his buffalo family. And again, he spent time with them as a human. And he, over time, would watch humans come for his buffalo family, and that made him very sad. And it just, like, it was, again, more confliction that he was having. And his father had shared with him that if he ever wanted to become a buffalo, then what he would have to do is roll over 4 times. And that if he ever wanted to become a stone buffalo, then he would need to roll over another 4 times. And so he had this information, but he chose not to do anything right away. But over time, as he was beginning to live with his buffalo family, he got tired of being chased in his human form. And so he finally decided that he would roll over 4 times, and he became a bull buffalo. And then again, more time had passed, and he was starting to have that lonely feeling again for his human family while he was living with his buffalo family. And that feeling of feeling conflicted, of not being with his human family, that was something that just ate away at him. And so eventually that feeling of confliction became so great that he decided that he would roll over 4 times again and became the stone buffalo. Now, what's important to remember in terms of this story is that there are various stories out there. The Plains Cree have the stories, Nakota have stories. There are different First Nations who have differing stories about what happened with this Buffalo Child Stone, but they are all important to know. None of them are wrong. All of them are correct. It's just differing viewpoints from different nations. So, this story of the Buffalo Child Stone, I have heard several variations of it, and they're all wonderful. And I love hearing new pieces that I've never heard before. And of course, the story I shared is just a synopsis of a bigger story. And I wish that we had the time to share all of that, but unfortunately, we do not. But this story of the stone, that was a long time ago. And the rock, it became known as mostos-awasis asiniy, or Buffalo Child Stone. As Kim had mentioned earlier, it was a sacred stone, and it does have deep spiritual value to the nations of the Great Plains. There was an explorer, his name was Yule Hind, and he actually had specific measurements for the Buffalo Child Stone. But it was approximately 19 feet high. It was about 30 feet long, and it sat by the turning river and just off the side of it. So many people gathered at that sacred stone for ceremonial purposes, and each nation, as I mentioned, carries traditional oral history regarding its origins. But over time, it became a gathering spot because it had everything it needed to be able to have huge gatherings. It had the valley, the river, the earth paint. So it was a good spot for gathering people. And at one time, there were 7 simultaneous sundances happening at that stone. And if anyone has had the pleasure to be at one Sundance, how many people are there and the amount of landmass that it takes to have one Sundance, the idea that there was 7 Sundances happening, it's something that like for as long as I've known about Buffalo Child Stone, it's still something that I try to envision in my head. And I just can't imagine the amount of landmass that it took to have 7 Sundances, and just how many thousands of teepees there must have been, and what a sight that must have been. Yeah, it's something that I actually spend a lot of time thinking about. But now, if you go there, there or over time and a little bit back, people were finding offerings there. So they found tobacco offerings, they found arrow offerings, and bead offerings as well. Things that were left there to honor and to pray at that stone that was a gathering place. So that takes us to many, many years later. As I mentioned, it was a gathering place for a millennia. Many nations would gather at this rock. But closer to today, the federal government, they had determined that they would like to create Gardiner Dam and Lake Diefenbaker. But this stone, to them, it was in the way. It was a boat hazard, which, you know, the unfortunate thing about that is they couldn't see it as a living entity. And so it it became a hot topic in the local news, and there was many Indigenous people and allies. They held protests, many gatherings at the rock to protest, and they're of course trying to preserve the rock. There was a bunch of lobbying to the government. They tried to raise a bunch of money to move the rock. But despite all that pardon me, publicity, oh my gosh, I think in the end, they knew what they were going to do, and there was no amount of money that could save the rock. And so they decided it would be blown up. And so the idea was that they would drill into the rock in strategic places, and they would then place dynamite in them, and then they would blow it up. But it didn't quite go as planned, and it actually shattered. And there was some bigger pieces, but there are also many smaller pieces as well, and some were manageable to be able to be moved. And so that occurred in December 1966. The reason that this was done is that there was the hopes that, of course, that this would put an end to the protests. And that was something that actually did happen. But it was a really devastating loss for First Nations people. But I think the important thing to remember about all of this is that the spirit of the buffalo, it refused to leave. It remained at that spot. But if we go back to the pieces, then there was a piece that was a large piece that was at the marina at Elbow. There were pieces that were buried with Poundmaker's grave. There were some pieces that were held in trust at the Western Development Museum. We have also heard stories of pieces being taken into homes and they were used as bookends. I've also heard stories of pieces of the rock being powdered and made into bricks, which are now parts of buildings where I am unsure. But these are some of the stories that we're hearing about some of these pieces. Now, in terms of like some of the pieces, like for example, some of those that were used as bookends, you know, that doesn't really honor the rock and its original intention. And so all of these pieces became scattered. And then the land went quiet for a long time. Now, what I want to move to is to like, what is an Indigenous sacred site? So the best way that I can describe this is, you know, when we think about Mother Earth, everything in nature is alive. The hills, the rocks, the trees, the water. And Indigenous people have a really strong connection to that water or to the land. And with Indigenous people, these sacred places, it's essential to our way of life, and they are often part of the natural landscape. And sacred sites are home to non-physical but crucial members of the community. So the earth, it cannot be separated from Indigenous people, and it is where we have a continuous or repetitive process of creation. So there are many renewal ceremonies. There is the telling and retelling of creation stories. There is also the singing and re-singing of the songs. These are all part of like a part of our maintenance of creation. And just on a personal note, I have been attending First Nation ceremonies for years. But I remember when we had our first ceremonies of Buffalo Child Stone. it was there for the very first time that I was able to hear something that I couldn't quite explain, although I know what it was. And it was the old man spirit from the Buffalo Child Stone. And when I was in the sweat lodge and I was listening to him speak, his voice sounded very, very ancient, and his voice was also very whispery. And he spoke in Cree, of course. And unfortunately, you know, I am a 60s scooper. I grew up with non-Indigenous folks, but they were very lovely and encouraged me to know my culture. And so I have been trying to learn Cree and reconnecting to my culture, as I mentioned, attending ceremonies for many years. So to be able to experience that for the first time at this site is something that I cannot fully explain or put to words the meaning that land now has to me. The best way that I could describe that is I now have a spiritual connection to that land. And it is, I haven't worked at SICC now for a little while, but I need to go visit that land every year. And in the last year, I was able to visit it on 3 different occasions. So it's become very important to me. Now, my gosh, I am so sorry, everyone. I haven't been advancing the slide. I get so wrapped up in storytelling, I forget to do this. So I will go slowly through some of these slides just so that you can see the pictures that I was talking about. But of course, here, this is the Buffalo Child Stone in its original form. And there is a man standing beside it, so you can just see how big it was. Somebody had said that it was like as big as a small house. So again, just to try and picture that in my mind is a difficult thing to comprehend. And then of course here is a buffalo, and I put that there for reference because if you go, if you see original pictures of the stone, it actually looks like a buffalo. And then when it was blown apart, the smaller piece that was brought from the Elbow Marina that sits there now, the biggest of the 4 pieces that are there, it also looks like a sitting buffalo. It's so interesting, and I will talk a little bit about the area there now. And this is an older picture of, this was some of the protests that were happening before the rock was blown up. You know, I opted not to show any pictures of the rock being blown up because as we were going through this particular project, when we had shown this picture to the elders, they reacted to the picture. And it was not a good feeling. And so I think to honor their reaction, I have chosen not to share any pictures of the rock in its blown up form. But anyway, this picture right here is some of the gatherings that were happening in the efforts to save the rock. And of course, this is a picture of Lake Diefenbaker. And again, some of the gatherings that were happening there, you can see a little child on the Buffalo Child Stone there. And this is the Saskatchewan Indigenous Cultural Centre where it is currently. And this is the rock as it sits now. So that bigger piece there, that is the one where if you go out there now, you can see it. And then there's 3 smaller rocks beside it. But I will talk more about pictures. We're going to go back to the Saskatchewan Indigenous Cultural here for a minute. So up there, you can see the mission and the vision of the Saskatchewan Indigenous Cultural Centre. But the SICC, they focus on developing and maintaining traditional and contemporary cultural skills and knowledge and lands of First Nations people. They're built upon 2 pillars. And the first is language, and the second is culture. And when I worked at the SICC, I managed the culture department. And of course, we cannot separate the 2. So the 2 pillars of language and culture, we worked really closely together. So along the way, in the work that we do, we have developed various relationships, both with First Nations organizations and non-First Nations organizations to assist in some of the work that we do. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but the Buffalo Child Stone Sacred Site is such one example of that. So when the rock was blown up, there was a promise that was made. And the province agreed to use some of the original rock and build around it. And the original intent was hopefully to bring the pieces of the rock so that it might resemble somewhat of the size of what it used to be. But when it was blown up and when Lake Diefenbaker was created, there was still many pieces that were still at the bottom of the lake. And so it can't be achieved, but the idea was that they would come as close to it as they could. So then almost 54 years later, the Elders Council at the SICC, they gave us direction to bring back ceremonies to the land, and along with that, also have commemoration land. So the idea is that there would be ceremonies, and then there would be commemoration land that could educate people about the stone. And so we did this through a partnership, of course, with the Ministry of Parks, Culture and Sport, along with Douglas Provincial Park to make that happen. But there were also several other partners in the form of some of the funding that we received to be able to do this work. So SICC obtained lands nearby the original location to be a place where First Nations people can gather again. And so, as I mentioned, the commemoration land, if you go out there now, you can see this big rock in the picture that you see there. That piece of rock weighs about 400 tons. And then 3 of the smaller pieces that were at the Western Development Museum that they held in trust for all this time, which is such an amazing thought that they kept it all that time for us. So that was really wonderful. So those pieces of rock were repatriated back to a nearby location. So if you go out there now, you can see those pieces of rock. And again, you'll find many offerings there, tobacco offerings, anything that people want to leave there to pay homage to what it used to be. As well, when you go out there, you can see interpretive signs. And those signs tell the story of the Buffalo Child Stone. And I just remember that whole project. It was wonderful coming up with a story, making it in compact so that people can get an understanding of what that stone meant to First Nations people, and then the pictures that go along with it. And the spot that was chosen, it's like a lookout spot. And so if you look out into the water, you can see the approximate location of where the Buffalo Child Stone was. So, and then nearby as well is the ceremonial land. And I know that, of course, when it's possible, more often in the non-winter months, there are ceremonies that are happening there, and people have camped over there as well. So the elders from long ago, they envisioned this land to become what it once was, a place of gathering. But now you can read about it and you can see pictures and you can see the approximate location. So it's really been a wonderful process, and I will be eternally thankful for my entire life that I was able to be a part of this. So it's been an amazing project. So I'm going to talk now a little bit about some of the laws and the changing laws. So what happened back then that wouldn't have been able to happen today because laws have changed. I believe that site would have been protected. In 1980, the Heritage Property Act was passed, and both the provincial and municipal governments, they are responsible to protect sites that are historically significant. So that includes sites of a special nature, human burial places, boulder effigies, medicine wheels, ancient rock paintings, and other sites that are to be considered sacred. There was another project that we were involved in, when it was rock paintings down south. I can't quite remember the location, but again, quite a similar project. So these sites, they are ensured a high level of protection where it cannot be altered or excavated in any way unless authorized by a permit. So as I mentioned, today it would have been different. There would have been a detailed impact assessment done to locate the archaeological or historical resources that might be impacted. And then they would have been mitigated, and violations, there's fines, potentially imprisonment. So, I think things would have been a lot different today. But, as I mentioned before, the spirit of the rock has always been there. No matter what has been done to the rock, the spirit of the buffalo will always be there. So what I want to kind of end this formal presentation part, I kind of anticipate that there is going to be quite a bit of questions, and I'll do my best to honor that. But what can we learn from this? When I think about the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, colonization has really impacted that relationship. But, if I think about the history of First Nations people in Saskatchewan and Canada, there's been a lot of violence. There's a lot of wounds and trauma. But if we think about everyone else that is here as well, I think about sometimes the journeys that some of the lineages that are in this virtual space are right now. How did your families get to Canada? I think a lot of them have also been marked by violence, and there's a lot of wounds and trauma there too. And I think we need to acknowledge that. For reconciliation, for reciprocity, we need to be able to share those stories with each other, to truly understand each other. Because as I heard an elder say before, no matter how we got here, we all belong here, and we are all responsible to take care of this land. So those are some of the things that I think of when it comes to cultural humility. In addition to that, it's an ongoing process. It's about self-exploration. It begins with us, of course, and it's being willing and able to do self-critique about who we are, where we come from, and combining that with a willingness to learn about the culture of others. When I think about cultural competency, of course, that means I'm just going to pick a random name that I see, Jeff Golly. Whatever your culture is, I could never fully know your culture, and you could never fully know mine. But the idea is that we are willing to learn about each other so that we can understand each other better. And it's also, means entering a relationship with another person with the intention of honoring their beliefs, their customs, and their values. So I think that's key in working to strengthen this relationship that we have. Now, if I think back, of course, to, back to that elder's vision, the work that we have done with the Ministry of Parks, Culture and Sport, and the work that we have done with Douglas Provincial Park, this is a beautiful example of reconciliation in action. And it was 20 years in the making, but it was all purposeful work, and it was not rushed. So it took as long as it needed to take. And if you go out there now, it's such a beautiful feeling. And to know the medicines that grow in the area. One of the reasons why I like to go out there is for the sage that grows in the area. And there's also lots of choke cherries. And it's just a nice place to go and think and be in nature. And it's a wonderful feeling. So, again, if I go back and I think about there was some of the wounds and the trauma that Indigenous people have experienced, I think, humbly, I would ask to honor honor this land and the intent of the land. So that is what I have to share about the Buffalo Child Stone. And I'm sure through questions, I'll be able to share a little bit more, but that's what I'll share for now. Thank you. Do you want me to exit the PowerPoint?
It's up to you. You can leave it open or turn it off.
Okay.
So thank you, Melody. Your passion and the meaning of this project too really came through. It's a great example of what people and organizations can do together in partnership to take what happened in the past to create a meaningful place for people to reconnect with their cultural heritage today. So we do have time for questions before we still have time in this hour. If you have something you'd like to ask Melody, please raise your hand using the icon on your screen and I'll call on you, or you can write questions into the chat. So we'll just take a couple minutes here to wait for people to do so.
You know, when I was, well, people might be thinking of questions. I was just thinking about like, how do you put together a presentation to talk about Buffalo Child Stone? And how do you even do that all in 1 hour? And it's a difficult thing. It really is, because to me, just the monumental meaning of this partnership and the work that has been done and the amount of people that have been involved. Like as I was coming up with this presentation, I was thinking of all the people that have been involved since I started at SACC in 2011, and the many, many hands, and just also to the many people in Saskatchewan that know varying pieces of story, and the articles that I have poured over reading about it, and, you know, not being able to get to all the details. Yeah, it's just, it was a difficult thing to put this project together, because I just wanted to share it all.
We have a couple of questions coming in the chat, and then I'll get to somebody whose hand is up. So first one is from David, your last comment about reconciliation taking as long as it took. Could you explain more about that?
Yes, absolutely. So, you know, the SICC is guided by an elders council. And so we don't give them all the details of the work, but we take work to them. They kind of take it in, and then they give us direction about what they'd like to see, the work that needs to be done. And so this had happened just before I started at SICC. So in 2009, the Elders Council at that time gave SICC the direction to create the ceremonial land and the commemoration land. And, you know, I think to do something properly, you can't rush it. And so for a while, many years were spent on, you know, touring different places around and seeing, you know, is the land going to be, does it have everything that we're going to need to be able to have commemoration land and ceremonial land? As I mentioned before, at the original site, everything that was needed to have gatherings was around in the area. And so I think we toured, don't quote me, I think it was 6 different areas. And, you know, in order to take all the elders out there, we have to think about mobility, we have to think about weather. There's different things that we need to consider in taking the elders out there. And so it takes time. And unfortunately, you can only take so many trips in a year. And so, yeah, I think a considerable amount of time was spent touring different parts of Elbow and figuring out which spot might be the most suitable spot. So again, it can't be rushed. The elders also take time to think. You know, it's often shared that when you go and talk to an elder, they may not give you the answer right away. In fact, it may take several visits for them to give you the answer that you're looking for. Because not only are they going to be sharing information in relation to the question that you're asking, but they're also going to frame it in a way that allows you to think bigger picture. And so that's part of the reason why I say it can't be rushed. then we also need to work with Ministry of Parks and Culture. We also need to work with Douglas Park. And so there are sometimes, you know, a date is proposed and that doesn't quite always work for everyone. You propose another one and it doesn't quite work for everyone. So when you take into consideration all these different things that are happening, as I mentioned, you know, like it just can't be rushed, and it will take as long as it needs to take. And so I think even just finding the spot, that was, gosh, well over 5 years before we actually settled upon a spot that would be it. So I hope that answers your question.
Sure, I'll go to another one from Hugh. How do First Nations view the water, in this case the lake, in context with the stone today?
So as I mentioned, water is a living entity. And, you know, I think probably in social media, there might be a lot of people who've seen a consistent phrase that is out there, and it's water is life. And the reason why we say water is life is because if Mother Earth is a mother, then the water are her veins. And so it's what sustains us. It's what keeps us alive. And so that's kind of the importance of water. But in terms of the Buffalo Child Stone, what I heard an elder say once is for the rocks that are at the bottom of the lake right now, they're drowned. And so when I think about, you know, rocks being a living entity, that's a really sad feeling for me. So I know that there was a fellow, his name was Stephen Thayer, and I think Stephen Thayer. I never actually had an opportunity to meet him, but he actually did a diving expedition, and we were able to see the rocks that were at the bottom there. And I think they're too big to move, but it's, as I mentioned before too, it's nice to know that the spirit is still there. It can't be destroyed. And so while there are some rocks still at the bottom of the lake, the spirit is still there. And I think that's the most important part. So I hope I answered your question there as well.
All right, we have a question from Amber. She had her hand raised. So you can go ahead and ask your question, Amber.
Okay, go ahead. This is, so we're sitting here as our grade 4 class are tuning in because we visited the site this fall. And so Seth is here. He has a question for clarity.
Okay.
We read a book and it said, and it called mostos-awasis a buffalo rubbing stone. Is it? And then a girl came in and Misogi, and she said that was buffalo rubbing stone. So would it be a buffalo rubbing stone, or is it like the same story or something?
I imagine that there would have been buffalo rubbing up against that stone. That's very a common action for buffalo to do. Now, I've also had the pleasure to meet Miss Sogi, and I have read her book that she wrote about the Buffalo Child Stone. So I know I answered the one part of your question. Was it a rubbing stone? Yes, it would have been, but it was most first and foremost, it was a gathering place, but it would have also been a rubbing stone as well. But I think there was part of your question that I missed.
Well, so we were wondering, do all mostos-awasis have their own name, like Buffalo Child Stone?
Okay.
Because yeah. One of the books that we also had read by Mary Bishop, she calls her mostos-awasis a buffalo rubbing stone, and then there's a story about their mostos-awasis that is in this fictional story. So do all mostos-awasis have a story that different First Nations tell?
Yeah, so if we just go to mostos-awasis asiniy, or Buffalo Child Stone, it was a gathering place for many nations, and they each had their own stories about its origin. And so for any rock that was of significance, and there are like a few in Saskatchewan. I know there's one about an hour out of Saskatoon, and then there's one on the highway to Calgary. There's one over there as well. I can't remember the name of it. But for any stone that is of fair significance, yes, they would have different names and they would be in the language from different nations. The Nakota, they called the Buffalo Child stone rock. They called the boy Rock Boy. And so you can see how like it would have different names from different nations. And so that's the best way I can answer it. If the stone was of fair enough significance, they would have different names, yes. And so mostos-awasis, it just means big rock.
Okay, thank you. And is it okay if he asks another question?
Yes, for sure.
We went to the rock in Douglas and there was like cigarettes under it, and
Yep.
we didn't know what it was. And was it an offering?
Yes. So in First Nations, like when you were there, maybe you saw a lot of sage plants. And so what we say is, don't just pick the sage plant, but what you should do first is take a bit of tobacco and pray with it and just say, talk to the plant and let it know that you would like to use it for prayers or for smudging. And then you put the tobacco down. And then you pick the plant, but you don't just pull the plant out of the earth. You break it off so that it can grow again. So you don't want to take it so that it can't grow again. You just take part of it so that it can grow again. And so a lot of people will also put tobacco down at the rock, and then some people will pray, some people will just kind of sit and think. But it's a way just to let the rock, the spirit of the rock, know that you're there and that you're wanting to think or to pray. Does that answer your question?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Thank you. Say thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Amber and Seth. So there's a couple more questions in the chat, so we'll just go through to the next one. So from Brenda, for the site to be realized as a place of gathering once again, what might the elders want to see happen going forward?
You know, I remember that there was some questions about, like, should we have a big celebration? And in the end, the answer was no. Because this isn't so much about, making it a big to-do. It's about honoring the spirit and intent of the Buffalo Child Stone. So I think, a lot of these things that happen, especially in terms of sacred sites, you probably won't ever really hear about it in the news, because they're not meant to be big public things. It's to honor the spirit of whatever might be in that sacred site. So it might be the spirit of the stone, it might be spirit of the water, it might be a spirit of whatever it is that is sacred. And so I think that would be one really good thing to know going forward in terms of other things that happen, is that it's never meant to be a big event. It's just supposed to be about preservation and honoring the original intent of the place. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, the next question is from Brigitte, kind of connected a little bit to what you had just said in a way. So does the site have scheduled ceremonies that are advertised to the public to come and witness those?
Yes, no, they would never be publicized. Normally the ceremonies that happen there are so at SICC we would have seasonal ceremonies. And so, like, if you put it in a more Western context, you know how there's quarters, January, February, March, April, May, June. Well, in First Nations culture, we look at those as seasons. So at the beginning of every season, we would have a ceremony so that we can go in the next season in a good way, to help keep our minds right, our hearts good, and open ears, good eyes, That's why we have those ceremonies, is to go about our work in the best way possible.
All right, another question from Yolande. She's there with the Saskatchewan Arts staff. They're wondering if there are any restrictions or protocols that they need to know if they wanted to visit the site.
No, it is open, and like, so you could drive out there today. But I mean, it's also winter, so you want to be careful. But no, there isn't any special thing that is needed to go visit it. You can visit it at any point. But as it is a sacred site, we just I'm sure many people have heard before, like, leave no footprint, just go there to visit and then leave it as you found it type action.
Okay, and I see another follow-up question from Amber with her grade 4 class. It's more of a comment, I think. It was just about marking the place. It's just that it's not very clearly marked. So it might be a comment for SICC or park staff if they wanted to do anything more. But with that, because it's meant to be more of a come and go and spiritual place, is there any plans to better mark or
Yeah,
in any
no,
way?
we had many discussions about that with the elders. And again, it's not meant to be showy. And so there aren't any big fancy clear markings about where it is. But I honestly do think like if you went and talked to the park staff, they would show you out there. And once you know where it is, then you'll always know where it is. But again, it's not meant to be flashy or anything like that. It's a spiritual place, and so it's quite humble. Yeah.
Okay, last one that I see so far in the chat from Jackie. I was wondering what special protocols were taken to preserve the pieces of the rock when it was blown up.
Those are some of the things that I do not know. However, I know that with First Nations culture, we approach life ceremonial. So I am sure that there were ceremonies that were held from the time that people knew that it was going to happen up until the point that it was blown up, and probably even during, and probably many years after that. That in terms of our work with the stone, ceremony was central to our work. So before we began any work, we would start off with ceremony first, and then we would also end with ceremony. And so, yeah, I honestly cannot speak to that with any clarity, but just given the way that we go about life, that would be my best guess for sure.
Okay, that's all I see. So that'll bring us to the end of the webinar today. So a big thank you to Melody. We can't tell you how much we appreciate you being here to tell us about this great project. And thank you to everyone who attended. Some of you will be back on Tuesday for a presentation to hear about how 2 developers found value in rehabilitating the town of Battleford Historic Post Office and the Regina General Motors building and what it took to make those projects happen. There are still late registrations available for the remaining webinars, so if you'd like to attend the next one on Tuesday, just send an email to historic.places@gov.sk.ca or call our office to make arrangements. I did put that information in the chat, which I'll leave open for a few minutes, and that comes to the end. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.